would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land, and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Steff. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I'm on Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country because I know you acknowledged yours at the start of the episode and just wanted to begin by that.
Amazing. My first question is always going to be like, for context, where in the world you are. So I'm glad that you have already answered that. But this conversation, this episode has been a long time coming, and
Yep.
so I'm excited to finally get you on the podcast and chat about your story. So I'm grateful for you being here.
And
Um,
and thanks to you for following me up. And I'm sure part of that will come up in our
yeah,
conversation about why maybe it's been
yeah,
tough to get on the podcast, you
yeah.
know? Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is, I am always very conscious that people sharing their story on here is an incredible privilege for me to hear, but it also takes an incredible amount of vulnerability and bravery. And there are certain people in my personal world who are yet to be on this space because of that. And so I'm always grateful when people jump on here with me.
Mm.
So I like to start these episodes with a super vague question to sort of kick us off. And it is vague on purpose because I like people to feel safe where they want to start. Um, so where does your story start?
Thank you. It also feels very pointed as well. It's
Yeah.
like enough to latch onto and broad enough.
Yeah.
I My story starts in Tamworth,
Oh,
on Gamilaroi country, which is a regional town in so-called New South Wales,
mhm.
Australia. It's the country music capital
Okay.
of so-called Australia, and that's sort of my beginnings.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family of, as it was back then, three girls,
Hmm.
and a dad that was a Anglican pastor. My mum was a teacher, and yeah, I very much involved in church. Uh, yeah, some other things. My eldest sister, who actually passed away a few years ago, had a pretty significant disability. So that was kind of the world that I was. That's kind of where my story starts as well, and has been a really formative experience for me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess I started in that space. Church was huge. A faith that was largely evangelical. I think a town that was very white that I discovered when I went to uni. I had some unknown kind of unconscious racism that I had to figure out, and white privilege to reckon with, all of the colonization and patriarchy as well. So I guess like was in a really kind of that family space is really formative for me. I learned a lot of empathy and kindness, and that having a sister who was different to a lot of people, that there's gray,
Mm.
and that there's people who aren't quote unquote normal, and that, everyone might live different kinds of lives. So there was that, as well as, I guess, like sort of big
Mm,
norms and narratives around yeah, kind of patriarchy and colonization, which were kind of all in the faith mix as well. And I think have kind of unfolded on my way to kind of critique some of that and hold on to some of that. I think some of that has sort of kind of quote unquote saved me
mm,
from some of the harsher things that were there. Yeah, but also just kind of playing on the street.
mm.
I, when I was 11, I got gifted from my nan a Razor scooter. I was one of the first kids in my street to have a scooter.
That is a blast
Uh,
from the past.
I know. I remember like a very maybe a peak childhood moment was jumping 8 pizza boxes. So
Wow.
yeah, I'm yeah, it was a time.
That's impressive,
Yeah.
actually. I remember trying to go on my friend's Razor scooter, and I just do not have any semblance of like balance and coordination. It was a hot mess, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I grew up in Lithgow, which is not too far from Tamworth. It's, a few hours,
Yeah.
obviously, but it's
Yep.
similar, very regional, cis, het, white, conservative country town. And
Mm-hmm.
um, it has its pros and cons, that's for
Yeah.
sure. There is a
Yes,
lot
for
of
sure.
beauty growing up in a small town and a lot of rigidity that can come from growing up in that small town as well.
That's a beautiful way to summarize it. And I think I'm really kind of proud and love the part of
Mm.
me that grew up in the country. I think
Yeah,
that kind of grounded, slow formation that you can have, and also, the fact that you can just talk to anyone. I think
yeah,
moving to Sydney, it's a very different vibe, which is what I did kind of later in life. Yeah, but I love those parts, and that, the neighborhood,
mm,
and you know your neighbors. And I think
yeah,
there are systemic things which stop people from being able to access
yeah.
being part of a neighborhood long term,
Hmm.
including housing inequality.
Yes.
But yeah, those things I really loved about growing up in the country. Mm.
Yeah. What was I guess, the interaction with faith and family and the environment that you grew up in? Because, you can hear, and I have heard some really horrific and horror stories about the impact that faith can have in country towns, and even more so if there is any sort of difference in that family in terms of queerness or disability or health issues or something like that. What was that like for
Mm.
your family and for you?
Yeah, I think up until I left Tamworth, so I left at 19. I did all of my kind of school and growing up, I guess, became an adult.
Mm,
Um, in Tamworth and then moved to Sydney. And I think my work began when I moved to Sydney. That's when things really hit me that I had to figure
slight
some
difference
things out.
in demographic.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And also that's when I first discovered I was queer as well.
Yeah.
So I think largely growing up, and because I was an extrovert.
Mm,
I was sporty. I was a tomboy. I played guitar. I was musical. My
mm,
dad was the minister. There were a lot of things. I'm white.
yeah.
I am in a smaller body. There are a lot of things about me that meant that I could really just slide through pretty well. And definitely there are things that I'm unraveling about growing up that weren't, healthy,
Yeah.
or, that there were things happening underneath the surface for me. But
Mm,
I think largely, because I was sort of at the center of my community,
mm,
because of my dad, yeah, and just because of, I don't know, I guess those parts of me that fit in and were largely smooth,
mm,
church was pretty good. Like, yeah, and some of that is definitely like how you come to see a space. I think looking back, there are things that I could critique, and I hated watching the Easter movie on Easter, when they kind of show that the Jesus film, and you're like, what? Like, this is
mm.
awful and this is so
Yeah.
traumatic. And like, I remember moments like that. And I also remember like the comments about, like, oh, is, so and so's uncle gay? And it's like, oh no, he's not, he's Christian.
Yeah.
And I remember comments about, we never had a woman who could be a bishop.
Yeah.
And I remember conversations about the fact that women could only have certain places. But at the time, you think that's normal. And as a kid, when you're just kind of getting through and you just want to have friends and play
Yeah.
sport and have a social life and things like that, I think largely it was pretty okay. And then, yeah, things as a bit of a foreshadow really unraveled when I moved to Sydney and was confronted with some big things.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, you've already very much hinted at that, but I want to, before I ask you about how that unfolded for you, I want to sort of ask a question around how you look back on your teenage years, because we typically think about that as like our very identity forming period of time. And the reality is that there is a significant number of queer people who realize that about themselves during that period of time. How do you look back on that window?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I went to a public school in Tamworth. I didn't have any kind of religious
Yeah.
influence in my schooling, which probably is a piece that definitely shaped that space for me.
Yeah.
I had a couple of really good friends. I had a great kind of cohort of students. Like I remember the teachers talking about how it would be every second year was a real bad one.
Oh,
So there was a lot of drama in the year above us and the year below us, but
you
for
were the
whatever
safe year.
reason, we had some good some good eggs in our year, and
Uh,
apparently we were a bit of a breeze. So like a lot of that, I look back with a lot of fondness and gratitude.
mm,
And I mean, I do remember like a very visibly gay guy in our school getting utterly bullied.
mm,
I remember that. But of course, I didn't really connect with it in an emotional way because I didn't realize that about myself at the time. I was
yeah,
largely unconscious to that. Although, yeah, looking back, I can see the ways that I formed friendships and the closeness and intimacy that I held with some of my female friends, and when they would partner with other people or kind of connect with others, I remember having like really strong feelings of jealousy and like loss that I was not able to make sense of. And now I look back and I'm like, oh gosh, like of course, and like I think
yeah.
that's like a very queer experience to be like, oh yeah, that like best friend that we were in love
That's what
with,
that
that
is.
yeah, that we
Yeah.
just really cared for as a
Mm.
friend.
Yeah.
Yes,
We're just
yeah.
very intense or just intense in relationships and friendship and passion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, which then became narratives in the church, right? Of
Mm,
like, that kind of that's a really good thing to
mm,
have such a close connection with someone of the same gender, and what a gift. It's just
yeah.
that then it gets twisted a little bit when that then turns to romantic or sexual.
Yeah.
So yeah, but and I also think uh, part of that kind of high schooling is also that there was space for questions in my family. But I think like
Mm,
because my eldest sister could never verbalize the same like saving prayer that it was expected of everyone else. It's like you accept Jesus into your heart as Lord,
mm,
you confess that Christ is King, I don't know, whatever, and then like
yeah.
that's when you're saved. Like my sister could never verbalize that kind of thing because of her disability. And
Yeah.
so there was always space for, well, there must be space for other people to kind of or like a bigger expansiveness of God to hold that, or for people who are in, and this is all speaking from that worldview. Like I would have
Yeah.
different ways of describing this now, but when you're questioning, like, well, what about people on the other side of the world that have never heard about Jesus? Like, what happens to them? And there was always like, it was never like really binary black and white answers, because I had someone in my home who lived in the gray and couldn't fulfill the narrative, and so then others had to be able to be able to, there had to be kind of some spaciousness for other people. And I think that, and my parents were also quite like politically progressive as well, so that helped too.
Yeah.
And really strong for me were like the values of kindness and empathy, and my mum would always kind of send me out the door being like, look for the person who doesn't have friends and make friends with them, and that was kind of part of our faith. So I think, yeah, like all those things are in the mix
Mm.
there for me. Yeah, yeah.
So, with all of that almost uncommon progressiveness and curiosity within your family, whilst you were within that worldview and before you moved to Sydney, who was God to you at that point?
Yeah, I think God was someone outside of ourselves who we could go to for help, who we
Mm,
could ask for support. But then also, someone who also required something from us, and that would be hard. And there was sacrifice to be made, and I think it made sense of the painful things in life to go, well, God is behind this, and
yeah.
that's a kind of unhelpful
Mm,
doctrine, I believe now, to
yeah.
say that God is causing those things. But then also when other more conservative people would say, well, God caused your sister's disability. And
Mm,
that was not okay, So there's a bit of that in the mix of kind of that's where the gray came in is like, well, yeah, to some extent, yes, but to some extent, no. And that doesn't feel okay for you to say that.
yeah.
So yeah, I largely experienced God as someone who was a support and a caring being who you could call on for help.
Mm,
And prayer when things became beyond you, what you couldn't handle, there was someone there who you could turn to.
yeah.
But then also there was complication, I think, in that that life should be hard if you are going to really accept this being in
Mm,
your life sincerely.
yeah. That suffering is holy narrative is really unhelpful and at times can be really damaging and harmful for a lot of people.
Yeah,
I like to ask that question because I typically later in the episode like to mirror it because typically the people that I have in these episodes, their perception of who God is or who a divine being is to them changes somewhat or quite a bit. So I like to give people a bit of a before and after snapshot of I think it can give us context as to where we are now as to where we've come from.
I love that.
But take us to Sydney and what, because I imagine that even just on a surface, the demographic culture shock would have been a lot to adjust to.
Definitely. Yeah, I moved to a Anglican college on campus at Macquarie University,
Hmm.
and I was really kind of thrown into fundamentalism
Yeah.
there, like patriarchy, fundamentalism, really strict binary black and white thinking about faith, and I guess a real that kind of those kinds of apologetic defense of the faith,
Mm.
argument based um, Christianity,
Yeah.
and yeah, and a real assuredness of being right.
Yeah.
And that I guess also that kind of persecution narrative, like a lot of people are definitely going to resonate with so much of this.
Mm.
And I remember actually in Bible studies, I'd call my parents afterwards and be like, hey, like they just said this thing
Yeah.
is like, do we believe that? And
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully they would say, oh, look, they're a little kind of weird down there, So
That's a very, very polite and diplomatic way of describing Sydney Anglicanism.
yeah,
So,
and because my dad had trained at more, my mum had also trained at Moore
yeah.
College, which is the Anglican Conservative Fundamental College in Sydney. And my mum tells stories now of seeing the wave of complementarianism come through, like when they were there. There were all kinds of different beliefs about women in leadership and women being ordained, and there was a lot of that movement coming through. And my mum can remember and like names people being like, yeah, I remember him and he gave me the ick, like I just remember him in his boys' clubs
Mm,
coming through. So like it's an interesting experience that I think I've had in terms of that like, but also that my parents also kind of participated in that as well and kind of confirmed some of those beliefs but challenged some of them. And so there's a bit of a mix in there. So yeah, I think I remember it was a bit of a culture shock.
Mm,
Um, but then also a lot of it still aligned.
mm,
And there was I played music.
mm,
I am a confident speaker.
mm,
I I think a lot of those things which got me through in church in my younger years, then also set me up to be quite, quote unquote successful
mhm,
in the church there and community there, and kind of being a core leader. And I was really, really quite involved in that, both at college, and there was a church attached to it.
mm,
And yeah, kind of in the leadership of that community for a while, but also definitely had little nigglings of like, do we really believe that thing? Or like, that seems a little odd, or like,
mm.
yeah, this is kind of wild. And we do really intense Bible studies. Like it, but I guess it was like kind of, you're at uni, right? Like, and it's kind of normal, and you sort of, yeah, but also it's like not normal too.
It's an intense kind of not normal. I
Yeah.
I talk and I've talked about this in a few other episodes because I've had a few other people who have had quite a bit of an experience in the Sydney Anglicans, and because part of my story was doing year 13 with the Sydney Anglicans, and
Yeah.
so I often will talk about how conservative and fundamental they are, particularly in comparison to what we would consider, mainstream Anglicanism, quote unquote. But I'm curious because I know what it was like for me, what it was like for you to be in that space and to be to be much more immersed in that space than I was, and unraveling your queerness at the same time, because those two things don't go together typically.
They do not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I yeah, there was there's kind of like a few moments that I remember feeling pretty key. One of which was my pastor at the time took me out for lunch and was just like, "Oh, Steph, like there's nothing else about this lunch than to say thank you for your involvement in this community.
Mm,
Like because of you and these two other people, this community survives. Like you are so pivotal and so core to the sustainability and the ongoing connection and kind of holding together of this space." And I think he had his own hardships, like lived with a bit of pain and kind of had an ongoing kind of chronic maybe it would call it a disability, I'm not sure.
mm,
And so I think like got a lot of source of encouragement from us and these other two people who were kind of like really committed to that community of faith.
mm,
And then I remember another moment is like the night that so obviously at an Anglican Christian college, it's separated by gender. So I was in the girls' wing, boys were in the boys' wing, and that's great for
mhm.
keeping no sex until the
Yep.
queers come in,
Yep.
and then it gets very complicated. And so I was essentially like, kind of neighbors with, one of my best friends who one night, we just kind of, I just said, I think, I can't remember who said it first. It was just like, I've always been interested in kind of exploring kissing a girl. And
Yeah.
then she said the same thing. And then, that kind of unraveled to us just having this secret
Mm,
relationship. And that dove me into so much shame and so much secrecy. And I just remember going along to church and God, you got it. Like the Anglicans, they really drill in the shame and the judgment. And particularly when you've got university students who are like drinking too much and, kissing people and, whatever, they're like, judgment, judgment, judgment. Stop doing all the shit you're doing. You're
hmm
being naughty and, God wants you to do better. And I love it that they preach Corinthians over and over and over again, but don't ever go to a gospel where there's like, let's talk about Jesus. No, we're going to talk about the Corinthians and how bad they were as a population and all their sexual impurity and all their debauchery.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to keep preaching at you. So I just remember that, like, that unraveled me so much. Like, I yeah, I felt so bad about myself, and was just, in that kind of cycle that I think a lot of us know of, yeah, kind of really being pulled, like your body is pulling you in one direction and being like, this feels so lovely and great and connecting. And then, like, just immediately then afterwards, you're like, I feel like the worst person in the world.
Mm.
Like, I'm so scared about what this means for my future and my eternity and my relationship. And like, that cycle was just there for the next, months, I guess, until I kind of had the guts to go, I don't think I can do this turmoil anymore and feel pulled in two directions. And this part of me is continuing, and I don't know what else to do about it than to just say it exists and that I have to embrace it. Like, I can't fight it anymore. I've tried praying it away. I've tried resisting it. I've tried doing all the things of that kind of cycle of like repentance in inverted commas. Don't
Yeah.
think that's how repentance works.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and then kind of told my minister, like, hey, this is who I am. I'm kind of semi in a relationship. Who knows? Like, don't really know what to call it. I'm just trying to find myself, and I'm just trying to be honest about where I'm at.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of unraveled my leadership in that community, my involvement there. It was all of a sudden like, okay, we need to kind of respond to you because this is who you are. Like, it was sort of a flick of the switch of how I was treated by that minister,
Yeah.
of being so thanked to being resisted and, being such a positive influence to them being such a negative influence,
Yeah.
in a second. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm known for giving double-barreled questions in these episodes, and I'm going to hit you with one here because I want to ask what it was like for you personally, particularly, when no one else was around, what it was like for you in that window of time when you thought that who you were was not okay, because that's what you were being told from the external world, and from the church. But also, and you sort of just started to talk a little bit about it, which was the impact of that step of telling your minister at the time, because I know when I did that, it, shit hit the fan basically, and it does not go well typically. And sometimes it goes worse than others, but it's not a fun process by any means. And so, not just necessarily what happened, but the impact of what happened on you.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you kind of mentioned these feelings of isolation because that definitely is what happens. It just separates you
Yeah.
from feeling like anyone is in your corner or that anyone, you're the only person who, yeah, and kind of you have this thing that you're hiding.
Mm,
Yeah, shame is a really gross
mm,
thing that religion does to us.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I do. I I think this is where, you know, evangelicalism both hurt me and helped me
Mm,
in that it gave me such a strong and firm foundation of faith
hmm.
and who God was, and the fact that, like, actually nothing, and I'm going to use language from the time that
Yeah.
maybe is like, I'm just going to talk about it ongoing. Like, and some of this stuff I'd think about differently or explain
Yeah.
differently. But like at that time, it was like nothing in the world can separate you from the love of God in
Mm.
Jesus.
I
It's
knew as soon as you said nothing exactly what you were going to say.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so two things were happening at the same time. Like, I was like, I like it. There's no space for me. I look ahead, and all I see is the fact that you can't exist here.
Yeah.
And yet, but then also I look ahead and I see that there must be space for me here because of these other things that I'm told. And also because I'm experiencing something that you're saying isn't possible. And yet these two things exist inside of me where, like, you have this narrative that I'm no longer expressing my faith, or I no longer love God, or I no longer am following God. Yet I know that I'm doing that so desperately,
Hmm.
because I show up here time and time again and I want this so much. And
Yeah.
I'm also queer.
Hmm.
So there has to be something, but I don't know it yet. That's all I know. Like it's just kind of like it's the only thing. But like it was shattering to me, kind of coming to the impact of that conversation because like just the different way that you can be treated, like the way that you are embraced and celebrated, and like so central to a community, to then being like rejected and pushed aside and like kind of taken off all ways of being involved in that community that are purposeful for you, that mean something for you. And I think as well, it's the narrative that sends, and it's like that's what's so harmful is, it's not just that like I'm receiving that, but then my community can see that I'm no longer doing all the things that I was doing. But I think also like, I'm an ENFP and that's the advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, well, I'm just going to keep showing up. I'm
Yeah.
going to keep coming to church. I'm going to sit in the pews and you can say what you're going to say, but I know that I belong here, and I
Mm.
know that like God has space for me here, and I know some little niggling inside of me says that what's happening to me is wrong,
Mm.
and you can say whatever you want about me, but I'm just going to keep doing the thing that I know.
Mm.
And obviously you've kind of left me out to dry, but this is still my community. This is still my faith. This is still my God. And so
Yeah.
let's just see what happens. Like just do the one thing, show up.
Mm.
And yeah, I think from there, that kind of, yeah. And people also notice that too, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
I mean, I've got to ask because I think after everything happened in my story, I think I only went back into my former church maybe twice after that experience. And so I've got to ask where on earth that courage and bravery and resilience came from to keep walking back into that space where you are surrounded by people and yet completely alone.
Yeah, and that's the unexplainable mystery, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's like where I don't know why for some people it's see you later, I can't do this. And for me it was like, you know what? Actually, you don't get to say that about me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I for whatever reason, and I've thought about this. I think like, I generally have had pretty good mental health.
Mm.
I also would attribute a lot to my parents,
Yeah.
and that like they were definitely had the same beliefs
Mm.
about me. Like they were kind of in the same doctrinal belief thing that being gay was not okay.
Mm.
Um, but I would be like, after conversations with people like who would just kind of for, feel like they can say all these things about me,
Mm.
that what you're doing is wrong. Anyways, we don't have to kind of go through that. People know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just name that. But not say the explicit things because they're really
Yeah.
awful. Uh, yeah, I would call them in tears and be like, I can't believe this person has just said this thing about me. And like, I would be like, is that really who I am? Like, because I don't think that's who I am. I don't think that that's how I'm approaching this. And what they've said is just really hurtful. But like, if it's true, can you affirm this or not affirm this? Like, I just need someone else to be a referee here and tell me what's going on. And thankfully, my parents like just saw how hurtful and harmful those things were to say. And
Mm.
even though I know that they believed them in the background, they were just like, I'm so sorry. That's not okay. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Like that. And like, no, you're like, we love you, and I think I actually, yeah, a lot of that was maybe attributed to having um, that kind of secure attachment or some sort of safe place to go when all of that stuff was happening. And I remember my sister showed up to conversations at churches that were so harmful and sat with me. And we were both like, are you absolutely kidding me? Like, I can't take communion here anymore. Like, are you
Oh,
kidding
yeah.
me? And like, we would both be in tears, but
Yeah.
we'd both be like, you can't do that. Like
Mm-hmm.
I actually like we're lost for words. Like,
Mm.
so I think I had that support system. I had someone else to kind of witness me. I also had solidarity in some sense. And I also just had this fierce, like, I think when you grow up with a sibling with a disability, you see that like the world is unjust
Yeah.
and that like the way people treat some people is not okay. And so you're like ready for a fight. Like, and so like, and I would describe that. Like if anyone ever said anything like, you know, said some sort of derogatory comment about people with disabilities, be like, let's go. Like,
Mm.
I think there's a fierceness there of kind of advocacy that was sort of there, that mix of things, as well as being pretty firm in my faith and growing up with like strong values. I was like, this is not it.
Yeah.
But I don't really know how else to describe it. It's also a bit of a mystery. Yeah,
And so, how long did you stay in that very conservative Anglican space?
too long. Yeah. Um, I'm not recommending it. My
Oh.
advice has since changed. Get out.
Yeah.
As soon as humanly possible.
Mm.
I stuck around not just in that church. I kind of went through a few churches because I moved. But I reckon it was maybe about 6 years longer. I was in Anglican churches, maybe even 8 years.
Oh,
And I
my
know,
heart breaks for you that you were in that space for so
I
long.
know. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and because you get told the narrative, like if you go anywhere else, like nowhere else, no, none of the other Christians are Christians.
Yeah.
So you're like, well, guess this is where I got to stay. Yeah,
Oh my goodness. Okay, so over that like 6 to 8 years, what was it like for you to affirm and eventually embrace your queerness in a space that didn't?
yeah, yeah. I mean, let's just start with pretty tough,
Yeah. Because
pretty
I mean
awful.
that's tough on its own, even if you remove yourself from the
Yeah,
environment and you were still raised with that type of doctrine. That's hard enough to separate, but it's even harder if you are still in that environment, still having that sort of like fed to you on a week to week basis.
yeah, yeah. I and I think it was just back to basics. It was like I think like the first time I wrote a blog, it was like coming out standing on the rock or something like that. And like it was just like back to basics, or who knows what God thinks about queers, but all you know is that like um God is a rock and
Hmm.
a fortitude and a stronghold, and you can stand here and like God will protect you. God is this protective figure that when things are coming at you on all fronts, God is with you. I was just like, that's all I know. Like, let's just start there. Let's keep going from there. And I think then from that place, I started to just explore my queerness really. And I remember this funny like pastoral advice that someone gave me, which a minister gave me, which was just like, I think you'll be okay as long as you don't move to Newtown, which for anyone who doesn't know, Sydney is like the kind of queer center
Yeah.
of Sydney.
Oh,
And I
dear.
was like, what strange pastoral advice. Anyway, so the next year I moved to Redfern, which is
Yep.
neighboring
Neighbours.
Newtown, and got onto the online forums. I made my first group of queer friends. And really, like, they kind of showed me how to be queer and how to embrace yourself and how is queerness embodied? And at that point it was like, how is gayness embodied?
Mm.
And really like, how is like being a lesbian, although I never identified with that word, and I think that was a gender thing.
Yeah.
um and alongside that, did the faith thing in a kind of like, who knows, I know that like, and also it's very easy to distrust the church when it's being so hurtful as well. Like I was like, if this was like, if I actually felt loved by you when you're telling me that you're loving me, like that would be a different story. But I know so much that this is not okay. And like all the stuff you're saying, like, is
Yeah.
so bad. And, as time went on, I think just the clutches of their authority left. And I remember being in one conversation with a pastor. I've just got lots of like pastoral conversations that are just gobsmacking, really, because
Yeah.
at that point it was okay to be trans, but it wasn't okay to be gay. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
What?
Yeah. And at that point, I tried to have a conversation. I was like, that makes absolutely no sense. And then that pastor, he was like, oh, but here's a little article about this. And it was from someone called Patricia Wirrakun, who I don't know if people have been exposed to her. She did like some rounds for like sex education and sexuality and things like that. And she was a bit of a kind of like, the Anglican ministers followed her for a little bit. And she said being trans was okay and that we should love people who are affirming their gender. I know, wild. Yep, 10 years ago in the church, right? And then at that point, I was like, you don't know what the F you're talking about. Like, this
Oh my
makes absolute
God.
no logical sense. And from this point forward, I feel like I'm not trusting a word out of your mouth.
Yeah.
So just like strange stuff like that, just kind of unraveled things. And I was like, okay, like it's time to start trusting
Mm.
yourself and what you know. And yeah, and kind of leaning into that and leaning out of that because
Yeah.
that world is not is not happening.
Yeah.
And it also came when I first discovered my like read a book about kind of queer affirming or gay affirming theology as well and how to read the Bible in a kind of gay inclusive way. Like
Yeah.
that was super pivotal for me. And I just remember reading that book and having a really like the most spiritual, like kind of charismatic Pentecostal experience of my life, which was like I just heard a voice say, "You can rest now, Steff."
Yeah.
And it was like really wild to kind of have that experience. But I think, yeah, reading that, slowly letting the authority of church brush away and trusting myself and kind of leaning into other spaces to learn, and just kind of coming into my body and being like, well, here are these two things
Mm.
coexisting at the same time. Let's go. Yeah.
So, if people are really listening, they might have noticed that you hinted at a couple of little things, which is so I'm going to ask a question based on that, which is so when did the questions around your gender start and what was that like for you?
Yeah, that came a lot later and it was around maybe 31 or something like that I guess in embracing my gayness,
Yeah.
kind of quote unquote. Um I'm saying a lot of quote unquote.
Oh,
I
that's all
don't know. It
right.
just seems to be my thing right now,
Yeah.
like thanks everyone, the quote unquote interviewee, Steff Fenton. Great. But yeah, I remember kind of I'd cut my hair short.
Mm.
I'd started dressing in a more kind of mask way. And then a friend of mine just one night was like, hey, Steff, do you reckon, like, would you want to try using they, them pronouns?
Mm.
And I was like, oh, um, I guess I've thought about it, but it doesn't feel genuine because I don't know. And I
Mm.
don't want to kind of take up space where maybe it's not my space to be.
Yeah.
And he really beautifully said, well, I'm just going to start using them and let me know if it doesn't seem right and just let me know if it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And and it didn't. Like it felt great. And when he used it and other people were around, other people would be like, oh, like, have you updated your pronouns? Like, are you using they, them pronouns? And I was like, maybe I am.
What a
Um,
beautiful organic transition, though.
I know, it's so beautiful. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. And by that time, I'd kind of gone way over the hill of the kind of evangelical faith, like kind
Mm.
of don't know if I can be gay, queer, whatever realm. And I was like, we'd been part of starting a queer affirming church at that point. And so exploring my gender identity was just so natural
Mm.
and kind of came alongside my like faith as well. And there was just space there to do that. And actually that church community was the first community to kind of start like kind of update
Mm.
start using they them pronouns for me and really help me kind of open up being non-binary. And yeah, and I think there was another moment when I was in the car with two of my lesbian friends, and we're listening to someone describe their experience of gender being non-binary. And I was just like, it was so much. I was just taking this in and resonating and connecting. And I was like, whoa, 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 can we just like pause for a moment and just chat about this? And I was like, okay, first of all, like question, like, how's everyone going? Like you're like everyone sharing these experiences, like what do you think?
Yeah.
And then I just remember seeing blank faces, like,
Yeah.
sorry, Steph, like we're not resonating with this. Like this is not my experience. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, okay, I'm trans.
Mm.
Wow. And really beautifully, one of my friends that day said, I think you get to choose, Steph. Like you can choose your gender. And that was another beautiful invitation that I got to take. Yeah, yeah. So that's sort of the transgender, non-binary exploration. Yeah.
How did your, I guess, your exploration and your, I hate the word journey. Really need to find other words to replace the word journey. I
Mm.
just have yet not to, I haven't found one yet. But your experience of like questioning, doubting, embracing and affirming both your sexuality and gender, that whole experience, how did that then, and this is probably the mirroring question, how did that then impact how you viewed God? And how did that divine being to you change?
Yeah, yeah. I think another significant part of my journey, let's lean in, was getting to study a Master's of Divinity at a
Mm.
progressive Christian college. And I learnt from women, people of color, from Indigenous theologians. I learned about queer
Yeah.
theology. And like at the point at which I enrolled in that degree, I was like, I know what faith I don't believe in, but I
Mm.
actually don't know what else is possible. And so that degree just gave me all the tools. And I thought I'd done all my deconstructing at that point. And then I was like, whoa, still got more to do.
Yeah.
We welcome it, we embrace it.
Yep. Yeah.
um, and yeah, I think it really kind of helped to put some pieces back together for me and in a really fast tracked way, which I think like a lot of other people do more of on a kind of slower journey because just the intensity of the amount of information that I was consuming and the variety. And like, I just am so grateful for that. And I think it's kind of part of why I feel so passionate about trying to share
Mm.
theology and different ways of reading the Bible. So people have the tools to do that for themselves. But I can't remember the question, but
That's all right. I was asking about your perception of God
oh yeah,
throughout all
sure.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, and like so much change, like
Mm.
so much change. It's hard to even kind of capture from like, even like, I mean, like the gender of God, definitely. I remember in that degree, I didn't ever use he, him pronouns for God in any of my assignments, which was amazing. And
Yeah.
yeah, got to write a thesis about the gender expansiveness of
Hmm.
God and the movement of that in through the Bible. But then also heaps of things about like nuances around suffering and forgiveness and like God's like where is God in the suffering? And
Yeah.
does God, the fact that we get, Jesus kind of foreshadows the fact that there will be suffering if you follow him. And like, a is that like a mandate, or
Mm.
is that just something that probably will happen when you're living in a way that's different from the system that you live in? Like, here's just a heads up. If
Yeah.
you follow me, it's probably going to be hard rather than like you must suffer.
Yeah.
So I think that like kind of those sorts of things really kind of shifted God from like a heavy, violent,
Mm.
patriarchal God to a softer, gentler God with kind of being and um to like a lot of that.
Mm.
And even the way that that God is revealed in the world as well, like learning from Indigenous theologians, like, and seeing how much in scripture
Yeah.
that nature actually praises God more consistently
Yeah.
than people do. and being like, wow, great, like that's beautiful. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so much changed. It's hard to kind of summarize it.
Yeah. I like to ask, and I know that what I'm about to ask is probably a very big question. So feel free to summarize in whatever way feels good. But um, I think a lot of the time there is this question, and I like to ask it because I know that there are other queer people of faith who are listening to these episodes. And I like to ask the question, how on earth are you still a person of faith when we watch the absolute atrocities that happen and can be done by the church system towards queer and trans folk?
Yeah. I think I mean the easy answer is just the separation of the institution from the divine being who is at the center of that story.
Yeah.
Um, someone actually, it was at World Pride. There was a panel on religion, and I just thought it was the most beautiful way to summarize what I'm saying now is like the church doesn't have a monopoly on God.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's that separation of who owns the stories, who gets to interpret them, who gets to share them, who gets to kind of say what's meaningful, and the fact that the church is so scared of letting us be part of those communities to share our stories speaks to the fact that we have something so powerful and influential to say to them that they are so frightened of that.
Yeah.
And time again, that is the story I look back on and I go, you are so scared of me because I invited you to repent and I invited you to I asked you for forgiveness and I tried to show you a bigger story of God and how confronting that you time and time again pushed me away because that was so hard to see. And yet here I am. I'm still here and I still have an invitation. And if you want to turn back and go like, I'd love to hear that sometime, what also happens is you don't just hear my story, you hear a bigger story of a divine being who is here with me as well. Like you kind of will learn from that. Um, yeah, yeah. I was
Yeah.
going to say something else, but yeah, that's kind of it. I think, and I think as well, talking about kind of trauma and
Mm.
healing, I
Mm.
think that why I'm still, a Christian, and I kind of problematize that as well.
Mm.
That label is a hard one to identify with, but also feels appropriate.
Yeah.
Is because so much of how I have healed from the trauma that's been inflicted on me by the institution that did that in the name of God. So much of what I find in the Christian faith and in the faith of Jesus and this divine being is that you at any point get to come back and start again and start afresh. And
Mm.
that at the center of that, there is compassion and grace and kindness. And you can have as much of that as you need. And that is open for you. And that someone will securely be there for you and be a place of safety for you. So much of that is around what we know heals people about having secure attachment, about having self compassion, about getting rid of shame and judgment. Um, and, uh, what I think heals trauma in the world and heals the hard things of the world are these soft things that I find in this faith.
Yeah.
And that if I can find that not just for myself, but I can find that in a spacious enough way so that others might also
Mm.
be able to bring their hard things to me,
Yeah.
and that I could have enough generosity and kind of looking towards them and empathy for them to understand maybe their experience that maybe they could heal too.
Yeah.
Like so much of that is what I know heals cycles of trauma and heals hurt and harm in our world that I just find them so centrally in the story of God that I'm like, these are really beautiful things that I don't ever want to let go of because they've transformed my life. I think that they transform other people's lives. And I think that they genuinely will transform and heal our worlds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's also why I stick around
Mm.
and, and why, I'm not pushing that on anyone else, but if anyone wants to find that, I'd love them to find that faith if they
Yeah.
still want to.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why, when I first started this podcast, that I wanted it to hold nuance for a spectrum. I have people who still identify as Christians on this show, like yourself. I have people who sit in the space of wanting to burn it all down and never want to, use a religious jargon language ever again. And that's also okay. And I think it's just allowing space for people to have the autonomy and the agency and the choice to sit wherever they would like to sit, and to feel like they have a place at that table, so to speak. Um, what is it like for you now to tell your story? Because we did allude at the beginning of the episode that this has been a very long time coming, this conversation. And so what is it like for you to share your story?
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to share with others. And I know like it's us two here in this room, but there are also so many people who are connected to these
Mm.
stories and who have been kind of had these conversations with you and who listen in and tune in. And it's lovely to connect in with a community of healers and people who understand and know and kind of you've nodded along at times when I've said things. Like we all kind of nod along. Like I was with my friends last night and I was talking about coming on this podcast today, and someone who hasn't had a church background was like, "Oh, like are there lots of podcasts about religious trauma?" And we all were like, "Mm-hmm, yep."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty big club out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think yeah, I had alluded to the fact that yeah, it took a while to come on here because
Mm.
advocacy and kind of probably sticking around for too long in that space has done a number on my nervous system.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just needed to take some downtime to heal and to really kind of recognize that life had to be small for a little bit.
Mm.
And but then I do have a fire in me. I'm a Sagittarius, I'm a fire sign.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm kind of really want to get take on the institution as well and be like, this is not your story. Like, this is not your narrative. This is not your divine being. This is not your kind of whatever. You don't get to own that. We all, like, you don't have a monopoly on this
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be back and kind of be, sort of coming back out of that shell of protectiveness and kind of being small. Yeah, and I've kind of alluded to the fact that a lot of that has been writing a book as well,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm really
Yep.
excited about. And I'm excited to kind of, in terms of the narratives that we hear about ourselves and the narratives that we heal from and kind of find different stories. I think that's so big
Yeah.
in trauma healing as well, as like finding a story for what happened, but then what's the story that you want to make of that that's strength based.
Yeah.
A lot of my book is about like kind of all these anti-queer, anti-trans narratives that are out at the moment that actually know trans people are illuminating the divine and showing that to the world, and they're deconstructing harmful gender norms, and
Yeah.
that is a gift, and that's a divine gift, and it's a story that it's a story of God in the world to kind of break down boxes and break down categories, and so yeah, I don't know. That's a mix of what it's like to be here today. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, this is a very nice transition and segue into your book. Although I feel like throughout the episode we might have another book that we could title like Things Pastors Shouldn't Say. That would make for a
Yes.
really good book.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But give us a bit of a picture of what your book is, when we should expect it, when we can hit pre-order, all of those things.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sam. It's so the title is Gender Expansive Faith:
Mm.
How Trans Lives Are Illuminating the Divine, Transforming Feminism, and Ending Christian Patriarchy.
Oh,
And it's a big title and a big subtitle,
mm.
but I do think I deliver on them. I
Yeah.
spent probably 3 years chipping away at writing it, and it's actually been my own journaling process of and through that writing process and telling stories I did tap back in and I'd kind of write a little bit and I'd be like, oh, actually, I think I need to process this emotion, or like I'm getting quite upset about this thing that happened to me. And I didn't realize that was still kind of in there. And, it was actually quite a lovely way to journal a little bit about what the stories are of what's happened. So there's a lot of memoir in there. I talk a lot about my own journey of like kind of discovering that I'm trans. I share a few of the stories that I've shared today, and talk a lot about the harm that has been done, as well as the hopefulness. There's a lot of kind of theology and history and biblical interpretation for those who want it, because there are two key passages that I still think are used in very harmful ways, Genesis 1 and Matthew 19, and they're at the core of the kind of gay marriage and binary gender norm theology and doctrine of the church that I've come from. And so I wanted to reclaim them and tell a different story and say, like, actually, these two texts are very queer and very trans. And God is showing up in very queer and very trans ways in these two passages.
Yeah.
And then I've also talked about things that like, women's only spaces, and how do we think about those in a way that kind of honor the feminist tradition and the space that women need away from men, and kind of honor the harm of the gender binary while also being inclusive of trans and non-binary people, sport. I kind of talk to men and how I think like men are really struggling in this conversation. But essentially it's kind of about the harm of the gender binary and how we see that in the Bible. We see that God is against the gender binary, and its harm, particularly perpetuated through patriarchy, and how trans people who kind of like smash that to smithereens are showing us a beautiful divine thing, which is to dismantle that harmful, those harmful categories. So yeah,
I love
that's the
that.
book, and
That's amazing.
hopefully ending Christian patriarchy in the process.
Yeah, I love
Let's
that.
do it.
Oh, amazing. And I know because I have a friend who's just put out a book, so I know that it can be a touchy point to like give dates and stuff, but can we expect it sometime soon?
Yeah, I'm launching in July. TBC
Okay.
on the date, but
Fingers crossed.
if you find me on Instagram, Steff_Fenton, I believe.
Yeah.
Or I also have a website, stefffenton.co. But if you just look up my name, you can kind of find me. I'm the
Mhm.
only Steff Fenton that spells my name Steff.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you find those, you'll probably see me
Yeah.
spruiking it, and there'll be links and things like that. So yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. And all of your links will be in the show notes anyway. And also I'll be spooking it. So you'll also find it on my page. But I before I get to what I finish these episodes with, I want to ask because like I mentioned before we hit record, your episode is going to come out during Pride Month. And one of the things that I wanted to ask people who were going to be released in this month was present day, what does queer joy look like for you?
Yeah, I think there is, I mean, just there is so much anti-trans.
Mm,
Um, there's like a wave of anti-transness happening at the moment, and like complete misunderstanding. And again, the same kind of invisibilizing and under-platforming of our voices that I've experienced in church spaces that is just kind of being perpetuated. And it's really hard to see it being perpetuated by the feminist movement, and by people who have that. So, in the midst of that, I think queer joy to me is, in my own privilege of being able to affirm my gender. Like, I get so much joy from that. I mean, I was telling someone the other day, I'm just like, it's so bad. I'm at the gym and I'm looking in the mirror and
mm,
I'm just so obsessed with myself. Like, I
I
am
love
so
that.
joyful, or like kind of just like being at the op shop and finding some sort of clothing that just is just great. And like, I don't know, like I'm growing a mullet at the moment, and it's just about the freedom to be me
Mm,
is bringing so much queer joy and so much trans joy specifically.
mm,
Um, it's really lovely. I've just moved cities from Sydney to Melbourne to Naarm,
mm,
and meeting people at a point where they haven't kind of met me before and they've only kind of met me as I am now is also a really beautiful thing that's bringing me a lot of joy.
mm,
And being able to have so many trans friends and people who, yeah, kind of just you speak the same language, or so that's bringing me a lot of joy, I think, is just spaces to exist as myself. I realize and recognize that's such a privilege because a lot of people don't have the freedom that I do, and I don't take it for granted, but it really should be a baseline at the same time. Like I also don't want to be like, oh, I don't really deserve this. I do. Everyone deserves
yeah,
this. But yeah, just those are the things. Those are the things that are queer joy for me. Yeah, just feeling good in my body.
yeah.
Yeah, feeling like me, feeling like Steph. It's
Mm.
pretty cool.
I love that. I'm going to, when time comes to schedule this, I'm going to have to resist the urge to title this episode "The One Who Is Obsessed with Themselves." So I'm gonna have to resist the urge to title it that now, but
Yeah.
every part of me wants to. I like to finish these episodes with some encouragement for people, and
Mm.
but I'm going to um put a bit of a twist on it for you in terms of I'm wondering whether you can offer some encouragement for the people who might be deconstructing and questioning the triple whammy in terms of faith, sexuality, and gender. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I'd say that if Steph today met Steph 15 years ago,
Mm,
they would be like, how in the heck? And you scare me so much, and that can't possibly be my future. Um, I would just say sometimes it's very hard to look forward and see that something different can exist.
mm,
And it can be really confronting and scary when you first move into a space where people are operating from such freedom and where you're trying to figure out where do I ground myself, particularly from like an ethics perspective and like a values perspective in and people are speaking different kinds of languages and using different words for God or the divine or even pronouns. Like all of
yeah,
that can be incredibly confronting. I'm not sure where you're at in that journey. You might be at a point where it's actually really liberating and it's a beautiful gift. But I guess I just want to acknowledge all parts of that journey,
yeah.
and say just um I'm resisting talking about tarot, but I'm also into
Oh,
tarot as a spiritual practice.
yeah,
Have a anyways, that could be a whole nother conversation. But we're in a hermit year,
yeah.
and the hermit is about kind of being in the dark. You have a light with you, and all you
Mm,
can kind of see is the ground in front of you. And all you really know what to do is just take one step forward. And I think for me, that definitely is also about like kind of that vision of God being the rock and kind of being this foundation in which you can stand, and this stronghold and this refuge of like maybe you can't see anything else apart from just this little space of safety here.
mm,
Be kind to yourself, be compassionate, keep taking the next step that feels right for you.
yeah.
And know that, there might be lots to kind of unravel or encounter, but you're doing amazing, and find your people,
Mm,
find people who can kind of show you, I talked about finding queer people who taught me how to embody queerness. Like I didn't know how to do it. Find people around you who can teach you the things that are important. And also, like, I stayed in church as well. Like, for
hmm.
me, maybe it was too long, but also it felt important to stay there too.
Yeah.
And just kind of tweak the little like knobs one at a time, just like what are we going to adjust here? It's one step towards where I feel like I need to be, or I feel like my body is telling me I need to go, my brain is telling me I need to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just kindness and compassion
Mm,
and slowness.
mm,
Yeah, and joy.
yeah.
Mm.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation.
Me too. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sam. And thanks for all the work that you do and just being amazing and creating this space for people to share their stories and connect with others. Yeah. It's so important.
Thank you. That's lovely. It might be the space that I've created, but it is other people's stories that have, you know, made it go into what it has become. So, I am appreciative of everybody who sits across from me virtually to share their story. So, I'm very grateful.
It's been a joy.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.